Good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you for your patience. I was not connecting this morning, and my goodness, I don't know what's going on, but yet we are here. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Please click like and share and tag folk who are not here. They may have been waiting. Oh, excuse me. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Come on into the space. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. By way of announcements this morning, I do want to turn your attention to a few things being hosted by community members. So let me, 1 second, get over here to these links so I can drop them into the, here we go. All right, y'all, come on into the room. Come on into the room. Come on into the room. Shay, good morning. There's a gnat flying around here. Good morning, Trina. Good morning, Kanita over on YouTube. So I have the first link that I'm posting here is for the Ma'afa. For those of you who, let me also, just a second, get that here to you here. Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is the Ma'afa. This, you can see the full schedule here. I just put the link in the chat on Facebook as well as on YouTube. Reawakening the African Mind. This is the 29th commemoration of the Ma'afa. Also subscribe to the St. Paul's Community Baptist Church, Brooklyn, New York. Subscribe to their Facebook and YouTube TV to be able to watch the live streaming of the sessions. There is registration required. However, the Ma'afa is free, but registration and a donation, I think, is acceptable for those who are able to offer something that they may continue to be able to provide this. So for those of you for whom you are at a crossroad, Ashe, and for those of you who wanted to know more, those of you who email me, who seek me out, what resources should you be reading as you want to connect to, indigenous spiritual traditions? You want to learn more. You want to know who to be reading. You want to know various things. The beautiful work of Dr. Mama Itihari Toure, along with Dr. Brawley and all of the St. Paul's Church there in Brooklyn, Priest Michael Elam, and others, Yvonne Duncan Smith and others, Nicole, excuse me, Duncan Smith and others who are doing this very important work. So there will be members of our community who are doing this work this week. Soon to be Dr. Margaret Connolly, Reverend Dr. Nichelle Guidry is preaching, I believe it today, I think maybe the 11th service. I know Dr. Heber Brown is up right now. And there are a host of virtual offerings all this week. And if you are in person, I invite you to get over there. It is something, if you can see it in person, to see it in person. I had the opportunity to share with them on last year, and the Ma'afa is a powerful offering. I think that we should be attending this conference like people attend Hampton Ministers Conference, like people attempt, Women Evolve, like people attend many of the various conferences that we attend, and then some I'm gonna delineate and say that y'all attend. This is one, Ashe. This is absolutely one that needs to be on an annual calendar, a reconnecting of ourselves to our traditions, a reconnecting of ourselves to acknowledge it, to understand the Ma'afa, which is the massacre, right? The transatlantic slave trade, the great disaster, is what the Ma'afa means. And so this is a commemoration of that. And I think that those of you who can should go ahead and register to be able to participate. I know that Dr. Daniel Black is also one of the wisdom bearers, Dr. Freddie Haynes. I shouldn't have started. Dr. Reverend Raquel Gill is closing it out. Reverend Esty Nina Dillard is working the Healing Hut along with Priest Michael Elam, and of course Mama Itihari. And so I just encourage you to go register, and I hope to see you in one of the virtual rooms. Ashe. Also want to shout out to community member Margaret Connolly. Margaret Connolly, who is hosting her Healthy and Holy Virtual Summit. That is this week, the end of this week, September 21st through the 23rd. Registration is now open, and you could go to www.healthyholyconversations.org to register for Margaret's Healthy and Holy Virtual Summit. She has some phenomenal guests who will be with her as well. And so I invite you to go to www.healthyholyconversations.org to register for Healthy and Holy Conversations. Also, finally, Evolving Faith. Reverend Shirley Brown Jackson presents the Evolving Faith, No More Silence. Registration is already open. Sherry is asking for those, even though you cannot come, if you will consider donating a registration of $30 so that Sherry is able to provide scholarships for people in the area. She's doing this in her hometown, people in the area, and then just to really offset costs for those of you who do this work, you will understand the costs associated with it. And so I invite you to register for all three of those events. These are the morning announcements. Ashe. Ashe, and I invite you to govern yourselves accordingly. Good morning, Miranda and Cynthia over on YouTube, and Kanita and Trina. Good morning, Glency, Barbara and Carmen and Key. Good morning, Yolanda and Mia and Jonetta, Antoinette, Shayla, Tammy, Rosalind, Angie, Sonia, Tracy, Tamil. Good morning, Dana. Good morning, Donna. Good to see you. Good morning, Chelsea, Kim. Good morning, Confidence. Good morning, Natasha. Good morning, Di, Marilyn. Good morning, Margaretta. Good morning, Irie. Good morning, Dana. Good morning, all of you. Good morning to each of you. Thank you for being present here. Good morning, Lori. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning to each of you. Welcome to the Pink Row Chronicles. There are so many moments of good morning, Fanta and Sid and Verzola. There are so many points of entrance this morning. Wow. So many places to begin. And so I decided that where I would I talk a lot about this in my intro to preaching class. You know how sometimes just because things are moving or something is happening in pop culture, I know that we get the urge to, quickly shift and go in that way. But, that it's okay not to get on the bandwagon. It's okay to take some time to think about some things. It's okay, right, to really to shift, Ashe. And so I'm looking for, it's a comment that I'm looking for. Hold on. Okay, this is where I want to go. I pulled up a sermon that I have preached before that is familiar to some, maybe even many, but it came to mind again for me this week as I was watching a series. And one, I want to debunk this notion. And again, I'm just going to keep saying it over and over again until we actually start practicing it. I want to point out grind culture in ministry, and grind culture in particularly preaching and for preachers. The grind culture that situates us at the intersection of wanting to be relevant and cutting edge with being practical. And so that means, particularly for those of you who are preaching Sunday to Sunday, Sunday in, Sunday out, and for those of you who have really whatever the normative size church is, where you don't have a big staff, you are a party of you, amen. To really debunk this notion of Sunday in, Sunday out, or whenever it is that you gather, that you need to have something brand new to speak to the people. I think that it is kind of a little outrageous to require something brand new when our problems remain the same. My goodness. I think that it is a little outrageous when a lot of what we are facing and what we are addressing, right, is age old. And so I'm not sure that it requires a new lens. I'm not sure that it requires every single Sunday. Good morning, EI. Every single Sunday. Good morning, Devon, for us to attempt to reach these mountaintop capacities to bring people over so that they may affirm, so that we may be affirmed. And it should also not be construed as not being prepared. I think that is a very Western ideation of success, means that someone has to present something new weekly to be affirmed and to be valued and to be validated as prepared and or as worthy. And so I'm free from that, friends. And so I have no problems repeating, refreshing, repreaching, none at all, because the problems remain the same. And as I have said in other spaces, it is likely that many of us are called to a particular word for a season. And a season doesn't only mean a Sunday, a season means a stretch, a length of time. And that's okay. And for those of you who've been praying and can't hear nobody responding, or you've been waiting and can't hear nobody praying, I want to encourage you not to remain silent because you are in search of something new, but to do a content edit, to go back and to see where the word is speaking to you still. And if it is speaking to you, if it is moving through you, then you should know that it is moving through people. Ashe. So that is my disclaimer. That is, I want us to all get to that space of freedom. And so I have recalled a sermon that I have preached. It's published under a different title, but that is one of those sermons for me that the very first time I preached it, it rocked me, and at the same time, it just continues to move deeper. I continue to get awarenesses, and so I want to invite you this morning to consider. Um, with your same ears, I say, not with new ears, with your same ears. I want us to go back and to reflect some more on this idea of exile or compromise. Exile or compromise. Exile or compromise. Let me read the text for you. The text is coming from the book of Esther, chapter 1. The book of Esther. Hey, Sora, Deborah. The book of Esther, chapter 1, beginning with verse 12. But Queen Vashti refused to obey him and would not come with the eunuchs. And this offended the king, and he became famous. He said to his friends, "This is how Vashti has answered me. Give therefore your ruling and judgment on this matter." Ahasuerus and all his people, then the governors of the Persians and the Medes, who were closest to the king, who sat beside him in the chief seats, came to him and told him what must be done to Queen Vashti for not obeying the order that the king had sent by the eunuchs. Then Mucaius, whatever that name is, said to the king and the governors, "Queen Vashti has insulted not only the king, but also the king's governors and officials." For he had reported to them what the queen said and how she had defied the king, and just as she had defied King Xerxes. So now the other ladies, who are wives of the Persian and Median governors, on hearing what she has said to the king, will likewise dare to insult their husbands. If therefore it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree inscribed in accordance with the laws of the Medes and the Persians, so that it may not be altered, may not be altered, that the queen may no longer come into the presence. But let the king give her royal rank, to a woman better than she. Let whatever the law the king enacts be proclaimed in his kingdom, and thus all women will give honor to their husbands, rich and poor alike. And this speech pleased the king and the governors, and the king did as was recommended. And the king sent the decree into all his kingdom, to every province in its own language, so that every house respect would be shown to every husband. And after these things, the king's anger abated, and he was no longer concerned about Vashti, or remembered what he had said or how he had condemned her. I want to go back up to verse 12. But Queen Vashti refused to obey him and would not come with the eunuchs, and this offended the king, and he became furious. Exile or compromise. So we enter this text at the climax of an extravagant party that is thrown by Ahasuerus the king. This 180-day party was to celebrate the king's recent conquest. To top off this excessive display of wealth, the king sponsored an even more lavish 7-day affair for all of the citizens of Susa. Drinking was without restraint, and guests were permitted to entertain and engage as much as they desired. Drunk with the wine and out of toys to display, the king decides to go for the shock and awe factor. The king's riches were no competition for the partygoers, as was the fact that all other women paled in comparison to the king's wife. To prove his point, he summoned his wife, Queen Vashti, to appear at the party immediately, adorned, as some would suggest, with only her royal crown. The text reads, quote, "But Vashti refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. At this the king was enraged, and his anger burned within. Vashti was exiled from the kingdom and ordered never to come before the king again, and her crown would be given to another who would be better than she." This morning, Queen Vashti serves as a symbol then for us, for the Black church, Not necessarily the brick and mortar, not the building or even the institutional system, but the bodies that believe together, the bodies, the collective. And Queen Vashti is in this text, she represents the objectified, the silenced. To be clear, though, she is the center and not at the margin of this text. King Ahasuerus, also known as King Xerxes, represents what Patricia Hill Collins identifies as the matrix of domination most visible in interlocking systems of oppression. He is the proud boy. He is the oath defender. He operates in the same vein as white supremacy does in our current context. So, first, then, we have to interrogate this process of becoming a queen. It was exploitative at best. Girls on the brink of adolescence up to the age of young adulthood were searched out by the king's servants. In essence, they were trafficked. Check out Dr. Erica Dunbar's work on this trafficking. Hadassah, I believe, is the name of the text. Just let me digress though for three seconds. um, just hold on a second, right? Uh, uh, um, we have to talk about this sex trafficking because if sex trafficking, human trafficking, the silencing of women and girls, the policing and exploitation of our bodies. Honey, if it doesn't make us want to throw up both our hands and holler, in the words of Marvin Gaye, that these issues are all intertwined, that our issues, that our issues, that we can not only be concerned, or we have to move beyond this idea, particularly as believers, as those who identify as Christian, that your Christian walk or your faith tradition is really wrapped up in an individual walk wherein Jesus is only your personal Lord and Savior. Jesus operates really as a genie wherein you rub it, you ask it, it does it. Everything you pray for happens, comes through. That Jesus is somehow this beacon of patriotic, capitalistic hope, wherein that will save us from an end time. This kind of word that we use in seminary that will save us from this kind of eschatological, which means end time, this apocalypse at the end times. And because we are only seeing, even though this text isn't even in identifying with the gospel text, I just need to go here for a second to help us understand our intersections and why it is so important for us to identify our intersections, to know that our issues, not only do we have intersectional lived experiences, but the issues that affect us are also intersectional. So we need to move beyond these very personal, while important, while God through Jesus, I believe, is concerned about things that we go through, things that we deal with, things that we need addressing and attended to. I don't believe they are only, how do I want to say it? It is not isolated, that these concerns are connected to the larger body, Ashe, right? It is never only just about us. So even in our prayers, when we are being requested to pray for individuals, we should always be praying not for just God to bless me, but bless and help bring aid to, bring relief to all that are in this position like me, all that are holding this position based on lived experience. Ashe. So I needed to help us understand that I remember attorney Natasha Robinson, Professor Robinson, saying that we are an intersectional people in desperate need of an integrated lens. So if chosen, the girls then had to go through a year-long process of being stripped from everything that was familiar, similar to a method of seasoning, like when enslaved people were seasoned. Then the girl was placed in a pool with other potentials. If the king called for the girl to come lay with him, this didn't necessarily mean that she would become queen, but in the case that she did, she was expected to obey the king's every command. Her agency then was limited. You all have heard me cite this particular reading before, and I'm going to do it again here. That in the African origin of civilization, Senegalese scholar Sheikh Anta Diop says this about the powers of domination. Quote, for people to oppress other people, there are what? For those of you who remember, there are what? There are three things that you take from them. One is you take their history. Two is you take their language. Three is you take their psychological factor. You take their history, their memory. You take their language, and you take their psychological factor. Along the same thought pattern, Leonard Jeffries said that those who oppress, colonize, occupy others takes a group's primary values, interests, and principles and superimposes the colonizer's history, language, and values and interests upon them. And no matter what conclusion they, the oppressed, come to in the challenge they face, they, the occupied, will always act in the interest of the colonizer. For the occupier, the oppressor, those that took their history, their language, and their values, their interests, and or their principles. So these women were reduced, and in order to be made presentable to the king, in order to be made presentable to the governing board, in order to be made presentable to the bishops, to the district superintendents, in order to be made presentable to the tenure committee, to the dean, in order to be made presentable to the pastor, to the governance council, to the publisher, to the search committee, to the grant maker, and anyone else who signs your checks that is not you. They had to be exposed, uncovered, deprived, and ridded. And so begins the treacherous process of making people believe that they don't have any spiritual power. So begins the treacherous process of making people believe that they don't have any spiritual power, of emptying them of anything that resembles their history, their language, and their gods. Oh my goodness. And filling the void created by the matrix of domination with their own history, their own language, their own gods, filling it with white Jesus, with predatory hunting, like slave masters creeping into the night to rape the enslaved, with the postmodern and capitalist ideation of individualism over collective well-being. I mean, who doesn't want to upgrade stations in life from the proletariat to the bourgeoisie? Who doesn't? Vashti's response of no is often overlooked for the more palatable story of Esther. Esther shows up as the more palatable because folks don't know what to do with a woman telling God, telling the king, that if I perish, then I'm just going to perish. Folk get a little mealy mouth when it's time to say hell no to injustice, not outside of the house, but inside the house. Yeah, I've seen a few times how this works. We want to point our megaphone outward, but when it is time to point our megaphone inward, there's a lot of silence that takes place. Vashti's response of no didn't win her any awards, though. What it makes clear is that when we as a body stop pacifying and pathologizing our rage, full stop, where's my water? Full stop. Let me run it back for those who maybe did not hear. Vashti's response of no didn't win her any awards. What it makes clear is that when we as a body stop pacifying and pathologizing our rage, I think sometimes we convolute, is that the word? I don't know if that's the word I want to use. I think sometimes we meld, I don't know if that's the word either, but we we put together nonviolence and rage. We use them as if to say that for people who believe in the who live out and believe, practice nonviolence, that they should be void of rage, or that there is no rage. In fact, rage is what, for me, fuels nonviolence. It is what it is. It is the necessary ingredient in one who lives the discipline of nonviolence. I'm not saying that as a nonviolent practitioner. I'm simply just acknowledging that the way rage, black rage in particular, commingle. Thank you, Soror. Thank you, thank you, thank you. um, the way in which a black rage is pathologized in from within black church, that this kind of mealy mouthed, meek and mild and turning cheeks, and without any level of critique against systems that fuel lived experiences for particular groups, for which rage is not only palpable as a response, but absolutely necessary. Yeah. So when we as a body stop pacifying and pathologizing our rage, when we decide that we don't want to be the next it preacher, when we recognize that the cost of perceived royalty is too much, when we understand that wealth void of ethics is embezzlement. This text reveals to us that we need to be aware then of the invitations that we entertain, that we need to know that there is a cost to everything, that it's politically correct now to be interested in black and brown people. We got a black woman vice president who graduated from an HBCU. She's a member of a Divine Nine Greek letter organization. But here's also what I want us to be clear about, that every dollar is not worth the energy that it is attached to. Every dollar is not worth the energy that it is attached to. What does this mean? At some point, Vashti had to bet on herself. I've been watching, let me go back to it. I have been binge watching The Other Black Girl on Hulu. And I'm gonna take this quote because Dr. Nicole Simmons logged it on her timeline, but it was the same quote that caught me on episode 6, and I highly recommend this series if you've not watched it. But it's on Hulu. It's called The Other Black Girl, and so this is a little. It's kind of a spoiler alert, but so Dr. Simmons says, watching episode 6 of The Other Black Girl and had to hit pause and breathe after Enterprise Gerard says to one of the main characters, "You were willing to embarrass yourself for them. Would they do the same for you? How much longer are you willing to compromise yourself for a paycheck?" This comes as a result, just to give folks a little bit of awareness about this particular film. This is a film, a series about two black women, and ultimately, they have to make one black woman has to make a decision whether or not she is going to be exiled or whether or not she is going to compromise. And at one point, she compromises her values to the point where she does not feel good about herself. And ultimately, there's an end that I, will let you get to. But ultimately, the end is when she is set for, she has to pause to determine whether or not she is going to choose a level of comfort that is attached to, right, her living, her ability to live, or so she believes, or if she is going to bet on herself, Ashe, and believe that the worth and the value that is within her will take care of her. Yeah. Every dollar ain't worth the energy that it is attached to. At some point, Vashti bets on herself, At some point, I imagine she looked up and realized her own nakedness. And I know many of us, we are carrying, still riding certain kinds of highs as a result of gains that have been made. For instance, many gains that we can just look out over the sea of theological education, shout out and big congratulations to all of the black deans, the black women deans at these institutions, both HPTIs and predominantly white institutions. I mean, listen, and it has us on this high. It has us in a space, if you will. I think that maybe some of us would think that we have come so far, right? And we have come so far. And yet what this also says to us is that there is still yet more work to do. Ashe, that there is still more work for us to do, that this is not the moment to pause and to sit down, because there are what is perceived to be many, when percentage wise there are still very few. Ashe. But this is time for us to consider whether or not we are going to engage in exile or be compromised. So let's talk about this exile right quick. Exile then is from the Middle English word exile, from the Anglo-French essel, from the Latin root exilium. So let's do this grammar review. So a noun, person, place, thing, verb, action, or occurrence. Stay with me. So exile as a noun means, quote, that it means that it is a state of or period of forced absence from one's home or country, the state of or period of voluntary absence from one's home or country. As a verb, it means a person who is in exile. Clearly, exile can be used in the negative sense, for certainly our history begs for us to take a closer glimpse at the way in which race, gender, class, sexual preference, and educational degree status can render people to the margins exiled from the center, banished, cast out. However, for the purposes of this morning's meditation, I'd like to focus on the second part of the definition: a voluntary separation as a sign of protest, as activism, as a mark of self-identification, as a sign of liberating practice. Exile as in having nerve. Exile as in writing, a letter to a group of ministers from your Birmingham jail cell. Exile as believing that your black flesh matters. Exile as in speaking revolutionary truth to corrupt power. Exile as in we who believe in freedom cannot rest. Exile, as in writing a book named All the Black Girls Are Activists. Exile, as in telling us that rest is our resistance. Exile. Compromise, from the Anglo-French compromise, from the Latin compromissum. Compromise meaning something intermediate between or blending qualities of. Compromise as in settlement of differences by mutual arbitration. So here again, we are focusing on compromise as a verb, defined as a concession to something derogatory or prejudicial, a compromise of principles. So let me just, the teacher in me, that for us here, we are talking about the second part of the definition of exile. Exile as a voluntary separation, as a sign of protest, as activism, as a mark of self-identification, or a sign of liberating practice, right? And compromise as a concession to something derogatory or prejudicial, as a compromise of principles. This is the decision before us. The question before us is Is it going to be for you exile, a mark of self identification, a voluntary separation, a sign of protest as activism, a sign of liberating practice, a sign of having nerve, a sign of speaking revolutionary truth to corrupt power, or is it going to be compromise? Conceding to things that are derogatory to your being, conceding to things that are derogatory, that compromise your principles. So I again ask boldly, exile or compromise. But here's the thing that I kind of just want to end off with, that sometimes exile is necessary, at times even a sacred calling, that the consequence for Vashti's self-awareness was permanent removal. I don't want to gloss over or romanticize this part, that radicalization is a type of initiation. If any of you have been initiated into a process, then you understand that hell always comes before public presentation. This isn't about me preaching you happy this morning, but the Spirit has invited us or invited me to speak to your heart. For some of you, it has been your refusal, that this moment is your enough moment. In real talk, speaking truth to power will often, more times than not, land one in both involuntary and voluntary exile. Ashe, Mama Donna, take care. I contend that the voluntary exile comes on our own terms. So if you let it, it will melt away shame. Yeah. If you let it, what exile will do, that exile will strip the shackles of European influence, of internalized oppression and self-destruction. But compromise, well, that presents a problematic rubric that makes us ponder questions like, can we all get along? Yeah. Will I make it if I actually start what was spoken to and over me? Yeah. You fill in the blank. This was the problem for Nella in the main character, one of the main characters in this, the other black girl. Nella was struggling. Nella was struggling to make a decision. Nella was falling deeply into compromise because she wasn't really sure if she could make it or not outside of the institution that was employing her. She was not really sure if she could make it beyond the gaze of those who in some kind of way owned her intellectually, even figuratively. Nella was a little, she could not quite gather herself initially to believe that she had the agency and or the authority to say no to the responses that were being, to the response of the authority that was calling her. Like the main character of this morning's pericope, exile can help us to see liberating moments in standing up against unjust systems, in standing up against half-baked policies, in standing up against bureaucratic backlash, in choosing banishment from the pomp and circumstance of the religiously pious, and saying no to institutions and leaders who have been bought and bossed, saying no to circumstances that leave us void of individual and collective agency. Exile presents the possibility of being saved from the negative effects of cultural colonialism, spiritual amnesia, and moral disintegration. Listen, the text says that after her banishment, not only did the king forget about Vashti and what he decreed, but there is only one other mention of her in the particular presentation of the Bible that we have. And as you ponder the question, let me ask you this. Here's something important to ask yourself. Will you be okay if your name is never called again publicly? Will you be okay if your name is never acknowledged? Will you be okay if you never make one of these lists? Will you be okay if a timeline update never gets shared? Will you be okay if your name is never again called publicly? This is essentially what happened to Vashti. Will you still live out your calling even if you have to sell some things? Even if you have to repurpose your multi-million dollar sanctuary? Will you still refuse even when everyone else in your cohort says yes? Will you still say hell no when they threaten to put you out because you marry and ordain same gender loving siblings, because you stand in solidarity with trans women, men, and non-binary kin? Will you be okay when they tell you that you don't have that they don't have a ministry assignment for you, when they encourage you to tone it down? Let me help you. Yes, you will be okay. Yes, you will pick yourself up. Yes, you will keep on marching. Yes, you gonna walk up into freedom land. Yes, you gonna keep on disrupting. Yes. Vashti became a disruptor. I wish I had some disruptors on here. Yeah, Reverend Tracy. Until we can be okay, we cannot be free. Vashti had to become a disruptor because voluntary exile disrupts the systems that seek to disembody you. While God is never mentioned in the book of Esther, who but God? Who but God could place a holy unction with Vashti to gamble with her life by refusing the king's request? If indeed you choose Vashti's example not to compromise your worth, your dignity, your agency, and your gems, then know that there will be times when you will want to revert back to shucking and jiving. There'll be times, Comfy, when you'll want to revert back to cooning and clowning for the empire. But know that you come from a long line of people who exhibited a similar freedom faith. Many of our African ancestors, those that Western imperialist practices of Christianity, like the Tea Party, the right wing, and others try to make us forget, ancestors of the Bambara and the Mende, the Ewe, the Ekan, the Kumbundi, the Zulu, the Hausa, and the Teso tribes survived being exiled to the turbulent seas and rancid conditions during the Middle Passage, also known as the Ma'afa. The same women and men survived the brutal exile of chattel slavery and some revolting, refusing to accept permanent captivity. Our foremothers survived the exile of charging those who violated them sexually, and our forefathers survived the exile that accompanied revolt against mental, spiritual, and sometimes physical emasculation. Our papas and big mamas, aunties, and uncles survived the exile imposed by the pride of the powerful during Jim and Jane Crow, refusing to accept separate but equal or being relegated to the back of the bus when sent for by the king. They opted against it and walked for 380 something odd days in Montgomery, Alabama. Freedom fighter Prathia Hall, when invited to the banquet of white supremacy and patriarchy, she chose exile over compromise. She said, quote, "This sense that I am not a nigger, that I am not a gal, that I am not a boy, that I'm God's child. It may cost me my job. It may cost me my life," she says, "but I want to be free. So I'm going to go down to that course house. I'm going to sign my name and I'm going to trust God to take me there and to bring me back," end quote. So friends, I just simply want to tell you this morning, I simply want to encourage you, be encouraged even of your choice. Be encouraged to know that someone chose exile for you. As Esther's triumph is indebted to her forerunner, so have others gained from the likes of Vashti. For Vashti not only stands with those who are condemned for their costly steps, but she also walks before those who succeeded in making positive strides. She and those like her are pioneers, and we do well to uncover the traces of their trail. Vashti broke out of her expected role of going along to get along and paid a great cost for doing it. And the storyline in Esther develops so that Vashti sows and Esther reaps. Vashti's cause does not die with her exile. It merely goes covert. Mm. Hear me. Vashti's cause does not die with exile. It merely moves underground. It merely becomes a use for as a strategic tool. Mhm, mhm. Don't be afraid, friends, to make your choice. Yeah, you got a long line of folks who are faithful witnesses to what it means to live in exile and for what it means to live exilically, if you will. So I just end by asking, what are you going to do when the king, the queen, when the royalty, when the man, when the system, when the empire, what are you going to do when it comes for you? For some of us, it has already come. But let me just end by telling you what a few other folk did. When the king came for civil rights activist, sharecropper Fannie Lou Hamer, Fannie Lou said, listen, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. This has to stop today. When the king sent for Maya Angelou, she replied, you all have tried to keep me down, but listen, and still I rise. When the king sends for Sojourner, she asked the question, but ain't I a woman? When the king sends for Maria Stewart, she tells them, get up, daughters of Africa. Arise, awake, and act. You can't be sleeping and slumbering around here. When the king sends for educator Anna Julia Cooper, she confidently states, listen, only the black woman can say when and where I enter. When the king sends for Rosa, she sits on that bus and does not move. But before her, young Claudette Colvin also sat on that bus and did not move. When the king comes for Gil Scott, he says, listen, this revolution, it ain't going to be televised. When the king comes for Martin, he says, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. When the king comes to Intozaki Shange, she writes, listen, I found God in myself and I loved her. I loved her fiercely. When the king came for former gubernatorial candidate Stacey Abrams for the race, when the race where she was held up, the words of this the influencer, what is his name? I forgot his name. DJ. I haven't seen him online for a long time. But DJ used to say this thing. He said, you see me. Yeah, that we are able to now see you. We understand that she and other black women turned the state blue and sent those two Democrat males to Congress. When Mary, the mother of Jesus, was exiled from the community because of what was considered an outlandish claim of being impregnated by God, she responded that with God, nothing is impossible. And when Jesus, this one that many of our elders and grandmothers, that it had been passed down, this description of Jesus as it would have been heard in many sermons and then identified and formalized through their lived experience, when Jesus that they would have known as the lily of the valley, the bright morning star, the Lamb of God, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, the way, the truth, and the life, our African Messiah who knew what it meant to live a life of exile, who loved his enemies and blessed those who persecuted him, and even had a nod to those that cursed him when he turned over the money tables in the temple and denounced the Pharisees, the lawyers, and the scribes, warned against hypocrisy. When Jesus, who was exiled to the cross, he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. But even in their forgiveness was a witness around justice. The question for us is not that we readily run toward forgiveness first. The question is, what are we going to do when they come for us? What will be our choice? Will our choice be to place ourselves in compromising positions where we are all but recognizable, unable to identify ourselves because of the concessions that we have had to make, and in so doing pathologize our rage, because God forbid we show up with the rage that we are entitled to, demanding justice. And so I just asking you to consider. And wherever you are, and whatever it is, because each of us has something that we are considering, to ask ourselves, is it going to be exile, or is it going to be compromise? Are we going to engage exile, or is it going to be compromise? That's the word. That's where we are. Wherever you are, is it going to be exile or compromise? Sometimes I hear you, and we're going to head over to the clearing to talk about this, because sometimes it's strategic and you need to operate in both ways. It's not always an either or, but there will come a time when it is, when you have to make the decision, where you won't be able to be lukewarm about it. My God, today, Jesus. So for those of us who are heading over to the clearing, I am pasting a link for those of you all who want to join us. Um, Here is a link where you can subscribe, and then you can inbox me and let me know that you subscribed, so that I can send you the link, Ashe, to our private Zoom. Yes, 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 Reverend Tracy. Yes, Miranda. Yes, Carla. Yes, 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 yes. Ashe. That's the question. Exile or compromise? Thank you so much for being with us. I invite those of you all who would like to give, you can give so into the Pink Rope Chronicles by using our Venmo, which is Melva-Sampson, or via our PayPal at Pink Rope Chronicles. Ashe, exile or compromise, govern yourselves accordingly. We are headed over to the clearing right now. Right now. Ashe. I'm starting it. And we